Okay, so now we are recording, and this is the Object Storage Working Group, and today is April the 5th. And yeah, we were discussing about the schedule. So this is not in the agenda, but we were sort of chit-chatting, and Matthias was pointing out that the let's say the morning for us in EMEA, the morning schedule, the morning meeting is a little lightly populated. So we were discussing if it makes sense to reconsider doing everything in the afternoon, which is more America's related. I mean, it's more about, I think, asking people that are part of the working group if they're still interested in attending, and if they say they have other priorities at the moment, maybe we can just switch to the other schedule.
I mean, another option could be to just do it bi-weekly, like every other week. Depending on it fluctuates a bit, like how much there is to talk about. Like sometimes there's a ton of things that come up at the same time, and then half an hour is almost like tight to go through it all. And other times there was almost nothing. I think we skipped once or twice as well and just did an async update.
Yeah, I mean, we can even consider saying that if there's nothing in the agenda, we just cancel the meeting, and so we keep having the opportunity for a more diverse in terms of time zone participation. And if there's nothing to talk about, we can just cancel it. So this could be a good way. Okay, so let's start with the agenda. So first of all, thank you, Matthias. I'm glad to be back, but thank you for facilitating the working group in the past 2 months. And I've wrote a couple of things in the agenda that are probably going to reshuffle a bit, if you don't mind. So I will skip point 2 and go to, because it's kind of part of point 4. So I would just go to point 3 first. So encryption requirement. So I was reading the agenda meetings and having a chat with Matthias as well as with Jakob. And I think that the encryption requirements came again in discussion, not really in discussion. I mean, something new was shipped in the product that included a new buckets, again, because of the encryption at rest requirements. So I think that when we did the first gathering of requirements, which was more about a collection of what we have than a real gathering of requirements, we kind of glossed over it to say, okay, there is this feature here, Terraform, in that case, Terraform state file that requires encryption, but we didn't really spend much time into it. And I think that before we have 3, 4, or 5 different implementation of this, I think it's worth trying to figure out what do we really need. So maybe opening a new issue, or if it's already there, continuing on that one and trying to figure out what options we have here, right? Because the way it's implemented doesn't really scale well, right? So this is we're doing decryption in the controller. I think it's doing in callbacks or something like that in active record. So we can't direct upload, etc., etc., etc. So what are the requirements here? If it's just encryption at rest, can we leverage object storage encryptions? What are we missing? Can we do this with native clients on workers or not? So that's the thing. Yeah, you have a point, Matthias. So
yeah, I was thinking we briefly talked about it yesterday, right, in our one-on-one, that I think it would be super helpful. I just think developers probably don't even know what is kind of like okay to do right now, and what maybe are practices we should just stop doing. So I think maybe it would be helpful to hand out some guidance around like which things should we stay away from, and which things are still okay to do, independent of like a specific like future evolution of uploads or object storage use, because there are some things we know we kind of want to move away from, right? So that we do not build up like even more cases that we might eventually have to fix or migrate. So I think that could be a good next step to like think about this and have something that we can point users to, because I'm a bit afraid that because we can't just say like stop doing X, but then not offer an alternative, right? I think we need to have like some clear guidance on like how to implement a new upload.
Yeah, I totally agree. I can add on this that when we did the first, say, categorization of uploads and writing some guidelines on how to upload on GitLab, this was kind of, so someone read it, but during review was really hard to pinpoint that there was a new upload and maybe the reviewer or the maintainers were not really aware of guidelines. So what really changed this was introducing Robocop rules that were detecting new uploads. So in the API, they were detecting, we were just adding a file, and this was kind of a red flag, right? Because if there's a file upload happening, this means that it's not going through workers. So documentation is the first step, obviously, but if we can add something that would just make your pipeline red, this will point you to the documentation. This means that at least someone that knows what we're talking about would get pinged and say, okay, I don't know, I can't understand this, so we can make the documentation better if it's not working, but it reduced the chances that something got merged into master without just not knowing that there is a guideline or something like this. And yes, and also, as you said, about just having a proposal, I mean, an alternative, right? Because we can't just say you can't do encryption at rest the way we are doing and not provide an alternative. That's why I was suggesting how to having something that really focus on that one, because I'm thinking that for the features that we have in the product, that one, so encryption at rest is the only one that is clearly not correct to implement in this way, but we don't have an alternative. Because for the other one, we have alternatives. They may be too much to work with. So let's say implementing direct upload is an alternative, but we are discussing how can we move this into a better shape. But still, there is an alternative, which is you should implement direct upload, and everything is already in place. But for encryption, we don't have such thing, right? So, and it was more about we made a decision about using that specific gem that I don't remember the name for the encryption, which maybe was the boring solution, which is fine, but there are competing requirements for running GitLab.com and things like that. So we have to balance all those things together. And if this ends up that we need to implement or extend something in workers or in direct upload or whatever, we should know it, and we should try to figure out if we can schedule this. Otherwise, it will continue bleeding, right? So we had one, it was kind of a small feature. Now we have two, maybe by a couple of months, and we'll have 3 or 4. And fixing all of them will be worse if we let us add new features that are clearly not okay with what we want to do. That's my part. Okay. Any other point on this?
Well, I'm just wondering, like, what can we take, like, action items, like even something small that moves us in the right direction? I mean, this encryption issue, I have no idea how much work that would be. I'm not even sure I fully understand the necessity of this, because we already have transport encryption, right? So it's not like we send data over the wire in like plain text or something, and we have encryption at rest at the object storage provider level. So I don't know, I'm not sure I understand, like, why we need an additional layer of encryption in the application itself.
Because we don't have encryption at rest configurable in the application.
Isn't that like an object storage provider feature that you would configure like on Amazon S3, for instance? So it's not really specific to GitLab, so it's a bucket configuration, isn't it?
If I'm trying to remember a conversation that I had with San on this topic. So if I remember, there are at least 2 ways of handling this. One is with, I think, managed key. So that one, I think, is kind of supported, because when you generate the bucket, you just say, I want this to be encrypted at rest. That's the encryption key.
And they do it all for you. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I think that one is implemented, but I think none of our buckets is configured that way, or if they are, it's kind of it's different. The point here was that, if I remember, I'm specifically talking about Terraform state file.
Okay.
So Terraform state file are clear text representation of the infrastructure, including all the information. So if an object has password in it, there will be password in the state file. Okay, so that's the problem of Terraform state files. And I think that the baseline in the conversation on this feature was that a customer of GitLab is storing those information in a bucket which is potentially shared among other users of the system.
Okay.
So that was the what started the conversation about we should make sure that there's no way to get the state files from another client, another customer, or things like that. That's why I was saying I would like to ask about requirements. So what are the threats that we are trying to protect from? Because a very simple baseline could be we should just use managed key encryption on all the buckets. Maybe it's enough. Maybe it's not, right? So
this is maybe a discussion we should then pick up with this team again, because it sounds like they're the first one running into it. So another thing, like to come back to this, like let's put up guardrails though about, because now it seems like they cannot use direct upload. That's not good, right? So I'm thinking as well. So I forgot, like I did look at the AMR when they first opened it. It was a while ago. So I'm not sure I remember. But if they moved to background uploads, that would be a problem, right? Because we just deprecated this, and it's going to be removed in a good month from now, less than 2 months from now. So that is something we would have to look at very soon, right?
Yeah. So because if I remember how those things are working, we are usually using let's say small files, small in the sense that they can be encrypted and uploaded in controller time without getting into a timeout error. But I mean, this is like when we had the problem with the Git LFS uploads. So it works, but then if that one was direct uploaded, but you still had the 5 GB limit. And once we worked over the 5 GB limit because of timeout, someone said I was uploading 15 GB LFS object and is timing out, right? So that's the same thing, right? So maybe someone have a state file which is several megabytes, and we can process this within the controller timeout limits. So
this is then maybe going into the directional question, like the question about future direction again. I opened an issue to discuss this. My feeling is, but of course I want to know what everyone thinks about it, and I got some feedback from Jacob around this already. I think we should deprecate this buffering as well. We should move away from doing this, because it always means even if you don't think about like Sidekick as part of the question, it definitely means that Workhorse and Rails need to share a disk, and that is currently necessary not just for uploads but for other things as well. But I know that distribution are not happy about this. They are ultimately hoping that we will move into a direction where Workhorse can run on a separate pod, like be completely decoupled from Rails. And I'm not totally sure how realistic that is, but like if we keep these kind of mechanisms around, that is certainly something that will get in the way. And another thing I don't like about this buffering is that I think it was a great solution at the time to address something that was immediately painful, right? Which is to upload large files in Rails controllers. But so as a workaround, I think it was great, like a great solution. But by design, it is not a great solution, right? Because it's fixing a symptom, not the cause, right? The cause is really, we shouldn't really upload files through Rails controllers if we can do it in a more efficient way. We should just all do this through direct uploads. That is my opinion. Even if it's local files, right?
Yeah.
This another discussion we had in separate, like how can we do that? How can we upload to a node that uses local storage with through Workhorse? And it is possible, right? It requires changes. It's just like we have so many disparate mechanisms for moving a file to its destination. It makes it really hard to understand how this works. And some of them are just like I feel like served their purpose, and maybe now it's time to look at consolidating all of that. That's why I would be against doing this, saying like, okay, just because the files are small, we just send them through this like, yeah, this buffer accelerated path, and again bypass direct upload. It just again adds or maintains complexity that I was hoping we can move away from.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. I will also double down on the fact that even if direct upload happens to be direct uploaded on the disk, right? It can't work on Kubernetes because even within the same pod, Workhorse and Puma runs in two different containers, and there is a configuration about which part of the disk is shared, which is only the temp file, which is where there's the intermediate file when things get moved. So that being said, this thing that you said, it kind of opened the conversation on point number 4, because there is the storing attachment without carrier wave, and then there's Jakob proposal about unified blob storage. And I think that these two options are not alternative proposal. It's just that the first one put the focus and more effort in direct upload should be the default. So it's a unified authentication point, a unified structure, a unified way of handling every file that goes from the user to the application. And then, let's say, as an exercise for the reader, left the discussion about how do we implement the database structure for it, and it was kind of mocked over how active storage is behaving, because it was the interest in testing if it can be done with active storage and things like that. Jakob proposal, on the other hand, is just tackling the storage, so the representation on database of stored file and retrieval. So it is not touching at all, is not thinking about how do we authorize or do things like that, except for minor cosmetic changes like send back a file URL instead of an empty location, right? But is more about storing those information and retrieving this information in an efficient way without doing a huge data migration, so that it can go back to the old tables if things are stored in the old tables, or to the new tables and things like that. So, and this one, not this one, the first issue points to what you were saying, Matthias, right? So if we don't have a centralized standard authorization for uploads that is already there, so we can't really ask every engineers working on a new features to implement a new authorizer, a new finalizer, understanding all the complexity around this. So without that, we can't really say this has to be transparent to you, this has to be just the only way of doing it. Because someone would always say, yeah, I mean, this is the first iteration, or we are just trying to figure out if this feature works, so I can't afford the extra work to do the say the full scale solution. And yeah, so that was my point. I would also like to hear from David here, if, I mean, because last time, so it's 2 months ago, so I don't know what happened in the meantime, David, but if you actually made some progress, or if you found some time to, if you are in some way working on the authorization part of it, or yeah, just want to know about it.
Yeah, I've been working on the single point authorization. I actually have a proof of concept working. Now I need to put it together and draw some conclusions. It's on a different issue of this one. I will link the issue on the agenda. On the proposals, between removing carrier wave and Jakob's proposal, I think there's a middle ground where we can have both, because they are really, really similar.
That was my first thought when I read both, and I mean, of course, you have more understanding than I do, but they sounded quite similar to me, except like I think you had an additional join table, which is a bit more flexible, but also adds, I guess, a bit more maintenance.
My idea or suggestion would be try to support this new blob table and have a look of what are the changes needed for this. Also, the attachments table, I would challenge it if we really need it at GitLab, because on active storage, the attachments table is basically just a mean of providing a way to attach a single blob to multiple business objects. But we don't really need that on GitLab, because that kind of relationship is already handled at the business level. So I have this feeling that we can get away with a single blob table that will have the polymorphic reference. And it's basically the blobs and attachment table in one. And that would be the very close to the proposal from Jacobs. So,
I had a quick, sorry. Oh, yeah. Sorry, you weren't done.
No, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. All right. I have, sorry, just a naive question, I guess. Yeah, I'm still like, I always try to like stitch this stuff together in my head with like, what are the existing mechanisms and how would we migrate to this? So if with disk buffering, right, where we have this generic route that requests might fall into that are not explicitly rooted in Workhorse. If we were to migrate to your suggested approach or Jacobs, whatever, something like that, since that would be replacing the table structure and the logic basically that carrier wave currently is responsible for, that would also mean that if we keep disk buffering around, we would then also have to have a mechanism for that does not use direct upload to still move files to a destination in Rails, right? Because carrier wave is a little bit more than just, you know, a blob table or something, or like an uploads table, because it has, you know, all of the mechanisms as well to actually upload files somewhere. So do you see where I'm getting with this? Yeah. Like if this is a carrier wave replacement, we're replacing more than just the data model, right? Is what I'm saying. So I'm wondering what that would mean then for things like this disk buffering.
Yeah, I guess the perfect example would be uploads done by background jobs where you can't use direct uploads at all. For this, I would take a very good inspiration of the attach API of Active Storage, where you have your business model, and then you declare that a field is an uploaded file, and this will generate the attach method that is quite versatile. It can accept a blob ID, or it can accept a IO buffer, if I'm not wrong. So, and just with those two, you already have those two usages where you can just pass the blob ID, that would be the direct upload usage, or you can pass the IO stream. And this is where you are free to pass whatever you want, a text file or whatever. So I would take inspiration from that, and we definitely need that.
But we would definitely have to like kind of re-implement those bits that were in carrier wave, kind of abstracted away behind the store call, where we actually like perform, like issue an HTTP request somewhere to it might be object storage or whatever the destination is, right? Because we have these use cases where, like you said, like I think it's in the import export, where we have that's not background upload, what we call background upload, but it is just a Sidekick job in which we directly upload to object storage. And carrier wave, currently that's very easy, right? Because you say something like carrier wave and the file type is fog or something, right? And then you say store and like it moves it there, right? So those bits, like the transport, right, that might still have to happen in Ruby in a Sidekick job. Those bits we would have to completely re-implement, right?
Yeah, well, we have things like, I mean, the idea that we can just generate random huge file on a shared instance and then upload them is broken in the foundation. So we had troubles when we were dimensioning the import export Kubernetes fleet, just because of this, right? There are limits. And if you have huge files, this can't work this way. So when you have something like David was suggesting, when you can just send in a string IO, basically object, means that you can write something that generates the thing to upload in memory, and the other thing is consuming it and writing it directly into the object storage destination. What is important here, which I mean, it was covered both in my and Jakob proposal, is that this should not happen in transaction time. So when you attach something which is not a blob ID, let's call it a blob ID, the point is that you generate the blob, and let's use Jakob proposal as an example. You generate the blob. I think it has a state field, something like this, which is created. So you generate it as created, and done. Transaction is completed. Then you start uploading. And at the end of the upload, you can open a new transaction when you say, okay, this is now finalized, which is the same thing that happened with direct upload with workers in front, right? So you do the authorization call, it's created, then goes back to workers do the uploads, then you finally reach the controller endpoint, and the controller endpoint say, yeah, this is completed, now it's finalized. So it's exactly the same thing. And there are clients for doing this, because we can finally use the official clients for S3 and for Azure. I mean, we're already using, but we can remove all the craft around it, right? Because we are using the thing, but then we have Fog. I mean, Fog is actually a new implementation, but we use Fog, which is a third-party implementation, and then there's carrier wave around it and our monkey patching. We are just removing all of this, and we just say plain tables, plain client, and then again plain tables, right? So
yeah,
and so go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think the main point is that we have plain tables, and the clients would be just used by services, really similar to the active storage services you can find. You have the S3 services, the S3 service, the GCS service that will just implement the upload or the ways to create blob IDs or new blobs, and it's everything packed together. So to answer your question on the background jobs uploading files, they would just attach a stream, and then it's the responsibility of that service to upload this stream to a given blob or a blob that needs to be created. So to me, it would be fully transparent for the developers. They would just attach things, and that's it. Everything else is taken care of.
Yeah. Also, another point that Matthias pointed out was the reference to this buffering as a default. So a technical detail here. So because direct upload can downgrade to disk buffering, the default disk buffering is a trick. So in workers is exactly the same controller that handles direct upload, but instead of using a real API request, is doing a fake API request that is answered by the workers code directly, which gives out an answer which says, yes, this is authorized, and I have no clue about object storage, so please write this down on temporary storage. Which means that once we have the single endpoint authorization, we just wire that API call into the single authorization point, and then basically we move the control over the Rails side. So let's say we start implementing and we say we only have this for GCS in the first iteration. So we know the configuration because we are in Rails, and we say, okay, this is GCS. We can give the new answer, we authorize it, we give the final destination, we just remove the delete URL, so workers will not delete the file at the end. I mean, we have very granular control over it. And if it's something like it's Azure and we still haven't implemented that, we can just give back the old answer. which is do this on file. And once we migrated everything, we can say, okay, now it's fine to remove all the logic around this.
And what you described, that only happens when exactly? When I do not use object storage, if I use local storage, but direct upload is enabled, or when exactly is that? Does that happen?
that one. So that specific thing for the everything that has not a specific implementation for direct upload is handled this way, and it always get the fake answer. My point is that the fallback. But my point is that once you have a single endpoint for authorization, you can start providing real object storage answer to those API calls that previously didn't have an authorization endpoint. And so they may end up into the, I think that in Jakob's proposal was kind of baked into it, because he was referring to generating a single URL, which could be in the uploads bucket. Basically, you do have the blob, which is based on what you are uploading. And so basically everything fits in there. And because it's backward compatible, it should be able to even find file on disk. Let's say you have old file on disk, and then you move into this. I mean, it's kind of, well, this is not something we want to support on long term, but the point is that Jakob description, it really takes a lot of effort into the fallback mechanism and making sure that you don't have to migrate stuff immediately to enjoy the benefits of the new system. So you could be able to find stuff either on disk or to the new unified blob storage.
Right. I think we're past time already, but in terms of action items, so it sounds like, because this is all connected and a bit circular, it does sound like the single auth endpoint is, because it keeps coming up, that is like kind of the most reasonable thing to focus on right now, right? So we're already, like David's already looking into this. So that's great. In terms of the preventing things from like kind of proliferating more, you mentioned that for new features being added, we should just always use the uploads bucket because it already exists and it's kind of like generic. Is this something that should already be in the documentation? Because that is not documented currently. So if developers add a new feature that requires a new upload, they don't know that, right? So they might just add a new bucket. And maybe sometimes that's necessary for some reason, I don't know. But is that something that we should do now, or?
I would consider adding a paragraph in the documentation when we say that the working group is, in order to reduce the proliferation of buckets and moving that, we strongly suggest to stick with the uploads unless there are good reason. And and maybe we want to provide some example of good reasons. Maybe we don't, but this is something we can just discuss in the review phase of it. We can, depending on how strong we are on this, we can change the wording, right? So it can be, we can prescribing this, we can just say this has to be this way no matter what, or we can just suggest, and then we try to socialize this idea a bit more around. But I mean, I think we are all in agreement that with a single bucket many things will be easier to handle, but none of this proposal will really need a single bucket. They can just generate it's more complex to handle, it's more complex to install, but I mean, they are just URL. It's just a matter of knowing what type of things you are uploading and then doing the retrieval of the right configuration. So it adds complexity, but is okay. So we are all nodding, which is good. At least the three of us are in agreement. So yeah, we are past time. Thank you all of you for this time. I will try to summarize what we discussed today and upload the video, and then see what we can do for the discussing the encryption requirements. So you made a link. Is this an issue that is already there? Yeah, it is. Okay, so thank you for your time and see you soon.
Bye.